And we're back. When we last left off, our cliffhanger, we were talking about completely redoing the way we encoded and managed audio. So in the telephone network, they charge by time. That's how they built things up. In fact, they had to teach people words like hello. We talked about that. The phone company invented the word hello. And then they taught people that you're supposed to say this word after you pick up this device off of the wall after it's been making this ringing sound. None of this was obvious to anyone. You don't stop to think about it. It's completely second nature to all of us. None of it was. Nobody had seen any of this before. I mean, if I told you, if something starts to make noise on the wall that's charged with electricity, you're supposed to go and grab part of it and hold it up to your head. It's like, sounds insane, right? Why in the world would you do that? I mean, it's got a battery in it. If you touch the two poles in the battery, you get shocked, right? So why would you do that? So they had to teach people, to, when it rings, quickly go over and pick it up and say this word. Because if you don't, some people would just stand there, and you don't know to say this word hello, so you wouldn't go hello, hello, hello. You just sit there and wait. It'd be like opening your front door if somebody rang the bell, and there's no one standing there. You're just going to look around and see who rang the bell. Was it a ring and run, or what ditch and dive? What's going on here? The problem with this with the phone company is, until you answer the phone and start talking, they're paying for the phone call. You're using capacity on their network, and they're not generating any revenue from it. So while you're dialing, and while it's ringing, until you pick up the phone, and in the case of operator assistance, until you say hello to the operator, and they can tell the parties to start, they don't get to write down the minutes and seconds on a little sheet of paper that ends up on your phone bill. So they wanted to get it going. They want you to start talking sooner. So they charge by the minute. If grandma sets the phone down to go get a cookie recipe, and she's not saying anything at the time, and you're waiting there, that's okay with them. They're just charging you by time. But on our networks, it's the kiss of death. We do not want to continue to sample 8,000 times a second and 256 levels and send that data if there's no meaning to it. So one of the things that we got good at doing was setting rules for what's called silence suppression. And we had to build a second microphone into devices, which all of your phones have, all of your vehicles have if they have Bluetooth audio, to mute out the background noise. It turns out to be a pretty simple fast Fourier transform subtraction, which was kind of mind-blowing when I discovered that. It's super easy to do this, actually, to sample your voice with the background noise and then just the background noise with a microphone that points the other direction and is not quite as omnidirectional. And you convert them to FFTs and you do simple subtraction, mathematics subtraction, and what you're left with is just you. It's beautiful, right? It's super, super cool. But that would cause you to suppress the fan running or the cat meowing or whatever, and suppress the silence. So you gain all that network capacity back, right, by not sending it over. So 64 KB per second during talk. It turns out we talk in spurts as well. You say something, and then there's a gap. Packets only generated during that. A 20 millisecond chunk will end up with 160 bytes of data, so you can push that stuff down. And then this chunk plus the header, you'll encapsulate into either UDP or TCP. So network loss causes some issues. Do you want to retransmit stuff along the way? There's also delay loss. The datagram arrives too late. This would be, for example, packets arriving out of order. You have delays in processing and in queuing in the network, but we know about all these delays, right? You got to manage all this stuff. Your odds are best for doing this inside of a company. And I remember when this was still wild and woolly, and it was a real threat to us because we were not able to deploy VoIP to you on our network, and companies like Cisco were very aggressively trying to push that solution out there on networks that really weren't maybe quite up to speed. And there were these IT advocates that didn't respect at all, didn't really understand. Like the last 15 minutes of stuff I talked to you about with 911 and stuff, have you guys ever thought about that before? Okay, do you know about IT? Right, yes, that's exactly my point. So these guys thought like it's just another application, and they would ignore these other things. They just weren't aware of them yet. So we felt threatened by this. And so I remember one of the things I used to tell people was, if you're so hell-bent on deploying voice over IP, I have a great idea. Let's put it in the CEO's office first. If you think it's such a great deal for your company, let's take his phone away first, or her phone away, and replace it with this. And they would go, like, exactly. That pause you just felt is you really agreeing that this is not ready for prime time yet. So if that's okay, if you still believe it, let me suggest this. Go to one of your remote sites that you're planning on foisting this technology on that's not going to work right, and let's do your annual performance review with your boss over that phone line. And you can tell him what a great job you've done putting this system in. Are you willing to do that this afternoon? I can make that the next line that's installed. If not, why is it you're giving that to everybody else in the company? Why is that your decision to do that? Like, you guys need to, like, take this stuff seriously. So I was really good at, like, y'all feel the, like, yeah, feel it? Okay. So I got good at doing that stuff, and we gave us time to, like, get our arms around this stuff. In the meantime, we were paying our engineers $10,000 a piece in bonus to get certified deeply in Cisco VoIP types of solutions. It was a whole curriculum, and I remember one Thanksgiving staying all day long printing binders with all the course material for like the 300 engineers that work for them. We were like panicked on trying to come up to speed and get it done, and it worked. We ended up doubling our field sales organization twice. We grew 400% when we got good at doing this stuff. So that's why I was like fabulous. I love that job. It was great. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. We've talked about this before, but the delay tolerance with voice is less than it is with video. There's no pre-recorded voice. It's almost all live. It's almost all streaming. And you also want to fix play-out delay, so you always want to try to play back something the fixed amount of time always after it was recorded. So you can either choose when you choose Q, which is how long you want the delay to be, if you pick a larger delay, then you're going to have less packet loss. In other words, you're going to have less points where this crosses over this, which is it didn't arrive in time to be played, so it's lost, basically. If you pick a small Q, then it's better interactive experience, but it puts more pressure on your network. So you may want to shrink the size of the packet or reduce the quality of the voice. So all those papers that I was showing you yesterday, and oh, by the way, I found them. So I'm going to pull a couple of these up and show them to you. The standards, they're insanely detailed. Let me find them here. I don't think I finished doing, here we go. All right, so let's open these up and share. Sharing is very important. It's always better to give packets than receive packets. Oh, that's not what I wanted to share. I wanted to share something else. Hold on. One of these days I'm going to share, and I think I've done this once, and I didn't get caught, I don't think. One of these days I'm going to share, and it'll have like the solutions for the exam up in a Word window, and I share Word, but yeah. No, you don't have to do that. It's on the recording. Right? So even if I like only have it up there for a second, you just like, I can pause, like, look everybody, the solutions to the first couple of problems. But that's the least of my problems. I've handed out exams with the answers. I've handed out the solution set. And I've handed out programs before with the answer, and then I have to tell people, okay, so now you know how this one's done. Now try this one. Right? You know, stupid stuff like that. So here's an implementation guide on terminals and objective assessment methods. So this one is, one. I just want to give you a little bit of an idea what some of these look like here. These are too short. I want to find a little bit bigger one. Here we go. Mean opinion score interpretation. So there's a whole series of these standards in here. You can't read this stuff, I'm sure, but this is pretty well organized. And what they basically walk you through is the way you define these terms, etc. The equipment interpreting MOS values. This is mean opinion score. The language, the speech material, the difference in interpretation, the subject, preparation of subjects, the acoustic environment, presentation levels. So they have specifications for every little detail of how all of this stuff is supposed to work. Is it passive or interactive? Is it sample-based or continuous assessment? Here's the test plan, the date and the place, the purpose of the experiment, the information, the number of subjects, their profiles, age and gender, the type of the subject. And then there's formulas they tell you, like you can't base a mean opinion score and publish it as conformant to this standard if everybody was a 45-year-old male English speaker from the East Coast. Like, well, you wouldn't probably sample that anyway, but they're just making sure, keeping an eye on you. And so they walk through where all these other standards are. Some of these things are long. Here's one that's 37 pages on telephone transmission quality. This is one that I had to deal with. And so they'll walk you through, like in this example, at a certain frequency range, the spectrum density, your total power in each 1/3 octave, etc., the room noise spectral density that you must conform to, the types of microphones, how you measure noise pollution, how often you need to measure. There's ones in here I found that give you the text that the person's supposed to read and details about like how to find the right kind of voice actor to do it. And yeah, it's like to try to standardize the thing. And you can download standardized audio recordings to play over these networks and take the results and send them off to have them analyzed. So they've tried to automate some of this stuff. And what Skype did was they showed lots and lots of automation with these things. So these standards are all out there. People try to get pretty serious about it. Unless it turns into a regulation, that you must follow this. The way these standards can get used is if you want to buy equipment, what you can basically put in your RFP, your bid, is to say it must conform to ITU 800 with a MOS score, a minimum of such and such. And you can ask them to certify that they conform to this standard. So you don't have to write down or understand all the details of the standard. You can make sure they do. You just want to use the stuff. So they're there to help people set standards for to permit commercial activity to take place. Okay, in this case, back to our 20 milliseconds again. You receive a first packet at time R down here. The first playout is going to begin at P, and you want your second playout schedule to kind of maybe start at P prime. So what you're trying to do is figure out where you have packets. Packets are being received right before they're being played. In this case, it was not. So the difference between here and here was in the reverse order that you wanted. So you increased your playout time. You set a new P prime to say, okay, we lost a packet. Let's add some more delay. Let's add another 20 milliseconds of delay. And maybe that will be enough to recover. So you're scrambling at this point in the middle of a real-time call, adding the delay. So this would be like watching, where have I seen this happen recently? Watching DirecTV on your phone. And you notice that you're 10 seconds behind the live television in your room. And then the network makes you wait for a moment, and now you're 15 seconds behind. So they just added 5 more seconds of delay to try to build more buffer because they drain the buffer. They may also lower your quality. Have you never noticed this? If you watched it while you're watching a live broadcast, the quality goes down, and you like try to stand still and like hold the foil up so the quality comes back again. It doesn't really help that way. So there's some delay estimates. It's very similar to TCP round trip time that we talked about, where you'll do maybe 7/8 or in this case 9/10 of your delay is based on what it was before, plus a little bit extra on what's happening right now, what's happening with extra delay. So this one's exponentially weighted moving average, or EWMA, and this is the timestamp you got on the last packet. And this one is such a super secret algorithm that I really don't want you guys to be able to read it, and so I intentionally hid it. I have no idea what's going on with this slide. But you know, being obsessive compulsive enough, it's actually going to cause me to go crazy. So I'm going to have to go look and see what this one was, because this will just never do. So I think it's this presentation. Nope, maybe it's this one. Yeah. Nope. Okay, it's this one. All right, so let's open this up, and we'll go down to that slide, and I will. Don't do this to me. Oh, what is it doing? Oh, it's because it's a PDF. I'm such a moron. I opened up the wrong one. All right. At least I know it's slide 10. Please stand by. We have top people working on this. All right. And aha! Secret revealed. Film at 11. All right, let me go over here and share it. You know, you guys helped me fix like a huge issue that had been affecting me for a year. You may not know this, but my machine would regularly get to a point where I couldn't open any more apps, and I would have to like reboot it. And it would happen sometimes during lectures when I couldn't open a Wireshark or couldn't do something else. And earlier this semester, maybe I was in Europe at the time, I don't remember. I was trying to show you process IDs as the addresses that were used in the top layer of the protocol stack. And I noticed like hundreds of copies of this program out there running, and I went, that's not supposed to be. And I went and looked, and it was my McAfee virus running away. And it would just spawn thousands of copies of some stupid little daemon. And when it got to the point where the OS said no more, that's the point when I couldn't open up any more. So I just removed it, and it's been terrific. Life is, I mean, it's given my computer new. So thank you for doing that for me. So what basically this one is showing is you are trying to estimate the deviation. We also saw this with round trip delay as well, with this beta factor. And this one is a little different because you're only going to use this at the beginning of a talk spurt. So when there's silent suppression, you're not sending anything anyway. When the person starts talking again, you're going to use this deviation to decide, for this particular talk spurt, which is a short period of time, how much do I need to delay this one? And then when they stop talking, which might be in a half a second or 1 second, depends on how aggressive you want to be. There's space between lots of my words, even inside of sentences. Do you want to break that up into spurts? Or just like what I just did, where it was like a whole second? So you can, it sort of challenges this notion that it is really a continuous stream of data. Maybe it really isn't. If you're sending like lots of little files at a time. Okay, in the hopes that we do not do that again, let's continue on. With loss possible, you've got to look at timestamps and sequence numbers to figure out what's going on. With audio, you can repeat the same audio clip that the person heard just before. It's a little more noticeable. You may hear it, but it's less disruptive usually than silence. With video, you can almost always get away with just repeating the last frame again, and no one will even notice. Because there's millions of pixels, you can't interpret all the information. It's changing 30 times a second, barely at the rate. You know why we use 60 hertz electricity, right? Because you can see things that are slower than that. And for fluorescent lights, they blink on and off. It's gas and it doesn't last that long. It doesn't have a trail of illumination like incandescence does, where it's hot and glowing, and even after you turn off the power, it will continue to glow for a moment. So if you just pulse it, 30 times, 60 times a second, it looks like it's always on. Not true with gas-charged lights in gymnasia and on street corners and in classrooms. They are actually turning on and off. And so one of the things we had to figure out as human factor scientists, I didn't figure it out, I'm not that old, was are other species able to see that? Like, would this drive dogs crazy, for example? Can they see things? And it turns out they can't. Biology kind of made everybody's vision the same in that regard. Okay, we can talk about how you measure a 30th of a second by chatting your teeth sometime later. So VoIP, you've got recovery from packet loss. One of the things you can do is something called forward error correction. And what forward error correction basically means is you will put some error correction at the end of one packet But if you move forward down the line to the next packet and the next one and the next one, you also can include, in addition to your error correction here, redundant pieces a little bit in the next few packets that are a second source of the same information, enough to allow you to rebuild this entire missing packet. So you'll reserve a little spot for your own error correction, plus a little bit for each of the last 3 or 4 or 5 packets. And by doing that, as long as you're willing to wait this long for the time between sending this one and the time in sending this one, you can rebuild this missing packet. So if you put a delay in of, let's say, 40 milliseconds, and you're way ahead of the curve, your stuff is arriving in plenty of time, so it arrives in your buffer and it sits there. It's not immediately needed to be played. There's some milliseconds left before it needs to play, and you notice, based on sequence numbers, that one of them's missing. Wait a moment, and as long as the buffer's draining, as long as you don't get like forced to speak or forever hold your peace with this missing packet, if another few have arrived, you can rebuild it and quickly reinsert it in before it's needed. So it's quite elegant. This is the same thing it's done with compact disks, because they're subject to burst errors and scratches and things like that. So we use lots of forward error correction. So this scheme is popular, and it's used in lots of streaming types of content. So you're going to send a little bit of a redundant chunk by exclusive XORing. So this is parity. Basically, you're gonna do that again. So I'll take some of my packet and I'll put it in each of the next few. This suggests that there's only one of them, like only the next one has it as well, but that's not really the way you're gonna do it. So the way to interpret this is, I turn this packet into part of what it was plus part of what it's protecting. That is now my new packet. And so what 3 becomes is part of what it is plus part of what this was plus part of what this was, because both of those were part of this packet now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this will get used for audio, for voice on cell phones extensively. We use tons of forward error correction on cellular networks because it's just super prone to errors. You can use it on things like Wi-Fi as well to try and protect packets as well. So this is a fairly elegant generalized protection scheme. Here's one that shows interleaving in order to conceal loss. So basically you divide up your audio chunks into lots of different pieces, and each one contains parts of lots of others, and you blend and mix them in. So what you're trying to do here is you send your 4 parts of this first chunk and you separate them in time like this. Instead of sending them sequentially, you intentionally send pieces of them in different envelopes. Why? Why? So you're on the right track. So what did I tell you guys you needed to do if you're going to design a protocol and you're thinking like you can ignore what happens layers like 2, 3, 4 layers below you? Did I tell you that was a great idea or a recipe for disaster? To just ignore what's going on at the layers below. Because, you know, this 5-layer model that we give you, the story that we tell you is we have this layering, so you can just focus on your layer and what you send above and below, and that's it. That's all you ever need to know. And I've heard people cuss in front of customers in executive presentations to clients before, saying that that is BS, and they like use the word in front of like a government minister. I saw them saying like that's a recipe for disaster. So it doesn't work. You have to know, these days you have to know everything that's going on above and below. Maybe not to the same depth, but you can't stick your head in the sand and ignore what's happening down below. So when I see a diagram like this, I know exactly why they did it. It tells me that they have errors that occur at layer 1 and 2 on this network that are sufficient to wipe out an entire packet. So if all of the data for this packet got sent all together, it's gone. It's just gone. And you're totally dependent on forward error correction. On the other hand, if you take this and you spread it out and you send part of it later and later and later, and as long as you don't delay things to where the user cares, like this is within your delay budget, for example, you increase the odds that most of the packet will get there, and the parity that it carries along at the end is enough to recover the missing piece. So this is exactly the approach RAID uses on drives, if you've seen that before in computer architecture. Right? So there's a lot of cross-pollination of these ideas. And then in this case, if this one got lost, you know, what they did was reassemble it like this. The other opposite approach of doing this is to actually have this be 1, 5, 9, and 13 are really the contiguous packets you gave me in the beginning, and I just started off from the beginning doing it like this. And then basically when they get sent across the network, I'm only missing, you know, these pieces. I can put the whole thing, you know, back together. Okay, so that's basically the idea. So Skype's a good test case to try and look at here. They have super nodes. It is a P2P network, but you do have to connect to the server. We talked about that lots of time before. And so they have this kind of overlay network that you connect to. So I wouldn't be surprised if Skype runs assets in Akamai at ISPs around the world. They may not need them everywhere, but it makes sense to have some of this pushed out. And remember, there's another driving factor increasingly now, because people are trying to attack apps more than they are networks in the last couple of years. If you distribute your application through someone like Akamai or Level 3 or Limelight or somebody like that out in all these locations, it becomes more immune to attacks. Because you can, if there's an attacker here and they're trying to attack what they think is your service, and because DNS and the ISP and everybody's conspired to actually place your service topographically very close to them, just a millisecond or two away at the ISP, all this attack traffic, while you're trying to figure out that it's an attack, it doesn't go across the internet. It's isolated, very, very close on one link. The ISPs are able to handle it. You're not ruining the ISP's uplink traffic. So there's a trend towards this anyway, to continue to distribute assets out just for protection. You know, you don't put all of your rifles in one shed for the Army. You spread them out so that if one of them gets hit, then the rest of them are there. You spread things out. So there is still this login server that you gotta have out there. So the way the client will work is you join the Skype network, you send a message into the login server, you get authenticated there, and now your buddy list is available. It keeps track of that as well. You turn green on all of their lists. It shows that you're online now, right? And the way you'll send traffic is going to be through this network of things. So what this diagram suggests is that your traffic always goes through one of these super nodes. It's always handling, passing the traffic. This is one way to sidestep the fact that there's a firewall here and you've got a private address, and so does the other person that you're talking to, which I guess in this diagram is actually over here. So you can't ever open a connection to them, and they can't ever open a connection to you. So you can open a connection to these middle guys. So we talked about schemes to try and overcome this, to teach routers how to respond to new TCP redirection protocol requests that will allow this to happen. If you both make a connection through, then please go ahead and tunnel me, build a tunnel for me in real time. But what this diagram basically suggests is something that's more foolproof for now, and it's widely deployable, which is just get out to something public. I'll make sure there's enough of these nodes out here to handle passing everybody's traffic through. So what's the drawback of doing this? What's the drawback of having all of your traffic pass through like a Skype supernode? Lots of traffic going through one place, so there's a scale issue. Be more paranoid. Point of attack, eavesdropping, people copying what you're saying. Makes it a lot easier on the NSA if they only have to go to these nodes instead of having to go to all of you. And anybody doesn't think that after 9/11 the government wasn't coming into the phone network and monitoring everything is crazy. It happened. I had the FBI repeatedly in my office, and they were wanting things like the maps of where our fiber was, and we're like, we're going to pass on that. Thanks. We don't. It's not that we don't trust you, it's that we don't trust the Freedom of Information Act, and somebody is going to talk some judge into making you give them our map. We're gonna pass on that. If you want it, you can take us to court, and they didn't. So, but they got what they needed, anyway. So it's kind of interesting. So you can initiate these. Here's Bob and Alice again. You all know how I feel about Bob and Alice. Nothing against them, but it's their time has passed. So NAT prevents these peers. An inside peer can connect, meaning if you both are inside sort of one of these types of connections. So this is an issue. Okay, so I promised you in the last bit of this chapter we would go back to talking about protocols that have been built that you all have available to you that you can use to kind of manage this entire, how's my buffer doing? Should I send packets less frequently? Should I send only smaller packets? Can I speed up and send bigger ones? How much buffer did the user set aside? Is the application taking data out of TCP fast enough? Who's going to send me these variables back? How do I set what the thresholds need to be? How are you going to tell me when it's time to do something? So instead of having to write all that infrastructure code, there are protocols which do this for you that have been developed, and the code's freely available that you guys can get your hands on. One of them is specified in RFC 3550. This is a real-time protocol that runs in the end systems. It will take, you hand it the data, it will encapsulate into UTP and push it over the network for you and deal with a lot of this stuff. So if two VoIP applications run on RTP, there's a decent chance that they'll interoperate with each other. So for example, if you want to buy a phone from one provider and call somebody else that's got a VoIP app on their phone, and that's all they have, you should be able to do it. FaceTime is something that implements a VoIP app on all Apple devices. But can you use FaceTime to call an Android user? No, but you can use Google Voice to do that, because both of those things will run there as well. And the Google Voice app looks like the iPhone app, except the colors are different. It has a touch thing and all of that stuff. WhatsApp solved this problem as well. It'll run on all kinds of things, but it won't extend the call to a PC. So we see examples where pieces of these things have been done, but there's not broad interoperability and widespread operability except on the public switch telephone network. So RTP is like a shim. It runs on top of UDP. This is one where the application user doesn't have to do it. This is, if you support RTP, you've installed a different version of software in your transport layer in the operating system. So if your OS supports RTP, which it probably does, then you have some new function calls available in your socket library to sit on top of UDP. Okay? And you may get dragged through a little bit of this stuff with the video streaming server for the last Socket Lab. Make sure you ask early and aggressively for help from the TAs. They have all the files. There's like a dozen of them, and Shengrong already talked to me, or Zhengang rather, already talked to me yesterday, and he's uploading a bunch more files of pieces that I think we're missing probably. So that's one you want to be aggressive and ask for help on. Okay, so port numbers, IP addresses, time stamping, it takes care of sequence numbering. So these things are now added into UDP. So if you're a purist, you probably are like, oh, rolling over and, it's like, what's going on? You've poisoned my beautiful UDP. So an example would be sending a 64K PCM encoded voice. You know what PCM encoding means, right? What does PCM stand for? You guys remember? I see we're going to have a little remedial acronym tutoring. Pulse code modulation. It's too big for Hangman. I'd have to draw buttons and zippers and individual hair strands. It's too long. Pulse code modulation. You're taking your sine wave and you're going to take just a certain spot on here and send just that value instead. So that's PCM encoding. All voice is typically PCM encoded to turn it into a digital format. So this application collects the data every 20 milliseconds. So there's 160 bytes at a chunk. Every 20 milliseconds, you're going to be handed 160 bytes that you need to transport across your network. So that's quite a few. How many of these chunks are you going to get in a second? Thousand milliseconds per second divided by 20 milliseconds. per chunk equals, well, if it was 5, you'd have 100. If it was 50, you'd have 1,000, right? So you can have 50 packets a second. Each one of them is 160 bytes, which is 1,280 bits, something like that. So we're talking about 500,000 bits a second. I think maybe 50K. 500 sounds way too big, so maybe it's like 50K stream. You can fit that in a 64K channel even with overhead. So just do real quick back of the envelope. If this turns out to be about 50K, if I'm like even order of magnitude right here, and you got another 64 bytes on top of every one of these for header information, minimum Ethernet, transport, and IP header, then maybe a 64K line. You should be able to do that with a modem even, with any kind of luck. It also contains things to let you know whether stuff's arrived out of order. It does not provide any guarantee for timely data delivery. It can't invent that because the routers don't provide it. But inside of a network that you manage, you can look for RTP streams and just route them in a higher priority buffer so that more frequently per second you'll pull things out of that buffer and fill your network bandwidth at that, and less frequently for the lower priority ones. So one of the things that a default router configuration from Cisco might do, if you have a Cisco router on campus, it might look for WebEx packets based on the port number that it's going to, and automatically put WebEx into a higher priority, unless you log in to change it. And I'm convinced that that's happening on some of the networks I use because the bandwidth is too bad. You can't get anything else done reliably, and yet my WebEx connections go through. And the audio recordings are there, the video's there. I'm like, they're up, there's something's, and I asked the network managers, are you guys prioritizing? And they're like, well, we prioritize. No, I don't think so. I'm like, well, okay, well, never mind. Don't go look, whatever you do. So this is set by the end systems and not the intermediate router. So here's the names of some of these types of encoding mechanisms. PCM MULA is 64 KB per second. Look at what GSM does for cellular. They push this down to 13 KB per second. What do you think the MOS score does when you push something down like that? It goes down. And then look at LPC, 2.4 KB per second. I don't know what the one is called that's half of this, but I'm convinced it exists, and it's what they're using for my calls from Mexico to the U.S. over my cell phone, because they're indiscernible, terrible. Even in English, they can't even do them. And then you have some other standards here as well. I've mentioned H.261 a couple of times. The sequence numbers are interesting. They're not counting bits. They're not counting bytes, rather. They're incrementing one for each packet. So they really do packet counting here, because that's the only thing they care about. They need either the whole packet or none of the packet. So with TCP, if your stuff gets divided up into different size of packets in here and you count the bytes, and as they come in, you fill in these areas, it's okay if something arrives strangely out of order, as long as you get to fill it all in again. That's okay. Not so here, because the only thing that matters, let's say a PCM MULA packet, an H.261 frame, for example, you can't make any, having the 5th byte does you no good. You need the whole thing, and you need it all at the same time, and you need it now. So if you miss this byte, then you've missed the packet. That's basically what they're saying. Just count packets. Okay, and then they go through a little bit more in here. Synchronization, source ID. There's some stuff they have to do for attack avoidance. RTSP is a way of asking a network to reserve these things, and this will actually build a server that will do video frames and send them over RTP packets. This one's more powerful. It also wrote the client side of this as well, so this is one that somebody like a Netflix could use if they wanted. Or this is something you could use to do real-time video conferencing. So this has reports that come back. There's feedback that's used to control performance. It helps if you have multiple versions of your video stream at different bandwidths to select them on. So what YouTube does is they give you like 5, and when you play a YouTube video, you can pick 160p to 260, et cetera, et cetera. So you can pick a lower speed one if you want, and you can force it to be able to watch. So has anybody been noticing these artifacts and things now when you watch video and you watch? Has it ruined it for you? You'll never go back. For the rest of your lives, you will look at this stuff and go, crappy algorithm, drop packet, buffer overflow. You know, you'll look at this stuff and it'll never be the same. All you will see are its flaws. So, you know, they say you work for the police force long enough and you just sort of have a bitter opinion about society in general. I'm a little nervous that a bell-shaped head means that you look at the things that are going wrong on a network, not the things that are going right on the network. So I hope it doesn't haunt you too bad. You also can have multicast senders. Do you guys remember multicasting? This is where you tell the routers that you want it to make copies of packets, and it will send them out for you. So you can use this type of technique, and these protocols support it so that you don't have to send multicast frames. We don't do this usually. One of the reasons is you can't really depend on the routers in the middle. So what these content delivery overlay network providers do is put routers everywhere and in every ISP. And therefore, if there's 5 users in that thing, there's not any other routers anyway to help you between them and you. I mean, it's like just you, the one router, and then them, right? So they have to unicast each of these streams out one by one. So if there's 10 people watching the same movie live, if it's a broadcast, then there's 10 copies of those packets going out. But there have to be anyway, but it's the server that's going to have to do it. Sometimes you can couple one of these high-end servers with a router and build it as a combined unit just to get the router's help in duplicating and retransmitting, fan-out routers that just do nothing but duplicate this stuff out. This would be like a conference bridge. If you have 50 people all dialing in to do a teleconference together, you may not use the computer to take the voice stream that's coming in from you, the speaker, and send it out to all of us who are all listening in on phones. There's 50 copies of it now going out. You may not have the PC do it. You may ask a secondary piece of equipment. So in this case, it might be a router. There's special conference bridging equipment that'll do this on regular conference call networks, and they have limits. So there's parallels now to almost everything we did on an old network now in IP, including some of these fairly sophisticated networks. So there's packet types. There's sender reports where they send back to you like, how's it been going? One of the things Netflix collects are these reports, and they make these providers compete with each other. So who's going to have Tulsa for the next 3 months? Well, let's see how you guys have been doing lately. Okay, Limelight, you seem to run your servers better because you had, in a similar network in Oklahoma City that I gave you the last 3 months, you guys did better than your competitors did in Topeka, Kansas, and in Little Rock, Arkansas, so I'm going to give you Tulsa for the next 3 months. Congratulations. And they're like, yay, I get to make another penny. And they'll pit each other against each other to constantly force them to invest as much as they possibly can to improve their network and still make money. This is a very Walmart kind of model. So it's interesting to mention Walmart for a minute because it's a little shocking sometimes, but it's also shows you where some of these ideas come from. So Walmart, you are renting their shelf space. Most people think like a grocery store. They buy the products and they put them on the shelves and they cross their fingers that you'll come in and buy stuff, and hopefully they have enough stuff on their shelves that you want that they'll make money. Okay, well, that's great if you're not Walmart. If you're Walmart, what you do is you take bids on the shelf space. You have so many people coming in that people fight to get products on your shelves. And you have certain categories that you want to have in there. You know people are going to want detergent, and they're going to want pickles, and they're going to want bicycle tires. So you will make sure you've got that stuff in there. But if the market doesn't provide enough choice, you will go to China and you will ask them to spin up a factory to provide a competing brand so that your customers have a choice. And you will rent that space. And if you do not sell enough product, if you don't generate enough revenue per linear foot of shelf space in a month, you could either abandon your product, basically walk away from it and donate it to Walmart, and they can make anything down to zero. They can cut the price in half, cut it by 80%, they'll still make money. Or you can write them a check. That's it. Those are your choices. There's also rules that you must maintain stock. So there's certain kinds of products where you are allowed in the store to stock, and that usually includes bread, Frito-Lay, and Coca-Cola, and similars. Those are the only ones that are allowed to come into the store and put things on shelves. Everybody else, has to use Walmart's distribution network, and which means you deliver stuff to their distribution center, and you pay them to put it on different pallets to go to each of the trucks and to get it there in time. And it got hauled from the distribution centers to the trucks on their own trucking fleet called McLean. Anybody know the name McLean? Ring a bell? How about Drayton McLean? Does that ring a bell? He owned the Astros up until a couple of years ago. He's from Baylor. So that was his network. So that's how rich he got off of doing stuff like that. So it's a different kind of model completely. So, you know, when you start seeing some of these content delivery providers, they basically are like, I have my content, I can guarantee you lots of users for it. Who wants to haul my traffic? So they can show up and kind of do things like that. Okay, there's a little more in here on stream synchronization and how they try to limit the amount of traffic. I'm only going to show you a few more of these things just to give you an idea of the depth at which they've gone to try and build this protocol. It's a viable, good candidate if you're trying to write code to stream video. It's a good project. We could have a course, if we wanted to, on writing for doing video codecs and GPU encoding and image recognition and streaming and monitoring and all this stuff, and we would get our arms around RTCP. Here's SIP that I mentioned before, Session Initiation Protocol. This is used to control the messages that go back and forth, say, between a voice over IP app or app running inside of a physical phone-looking thing and something managing the calls. So this can let the world know if you call my ex's phone number, which is a Houston telephone number, it will ring. Her laptop will pop up a display and start like ringing, making a sound to know to put the headset on and take the call wherever they are in the world, the Netherlands or Singapore or wherever like that. So we talked about this. It has call services in here. There's a handshake basically up at front, and then there's audio back and forth after that. Well-known port number, but it's a really big number. So they didn't get in on the land grab like in the 80s and stuff. So it just shows what Google thinks of them. You know, they said, give them 5,000, something like that. So it is a little tricky if you start handing out 5,000 and above, like our NAT chapter suggested that the NAT server was going to do. It was going to renumber port numbers starting at 5,000. That may not be the best idea in the world. You may run into things in there. So SIP messages are English language things. You can telnet into a SIP manager and type in commands just like every single other protocol we've seen and type stuff in. And if you Wireshark from an office with a Cisco phone on campus and figure out the IP address of the call manager, you can telnet to it and fake it out. Because they will not see your hardware address, because it's not on the same LAN usually, unless it's embedded in the SIP packet, which it will be, usually. Usually will require somebody to actually register the device. But, you know, that gets tricky because what if people just want to download like the Jabber client from Cisco and just use audio over that? You're not going to make people register their Ethernet addresses on all that. But again, like the table, like DNS, like ARP, like MAC tables, things like that, you need a table to translate from your public switch telephone number, your PSTN, public switch telephone network telephone number, and your user location. So here's an example. Register using SIP with this domain. Here's the version I use. I'm using UDP. Here's my IP address. Here's the email address, my username that I use to log in. Here's who I'm trying to get to. It expires in this amount of time. And so these systems will even map your name to that. So if you don't have a permanent telephone number, let's say you're not a big shot, this network will still try to get calls to you. So if I want to try to call you at your telephone number, I use a telephone to do it. Or I use software that turns it into a telephone call, right? So that's one way to get to you. But what if we both have voice over IP and you don't have a telephone number assigned? You're just in a different place on my campus, and I want to make a call to you. I can use your email address instead. So these systems will expand the realm of people who can use telephony by adding in usernames. So this is, this is maybe how FaceTime works. You can run FaceTime on an iPod that doesn't have a telephone number, or an iPad that doesn't have a telephone number, has no cellular SIM card. It just runs on Wi-Fi. You can still call it, right? So it's not part of the telephone network, but it works with the same exact technology, right? So this stuff is pretty good. SIP proxies, we've already talked about that. So the router steps in and acts. So in this case, Jim sends an invite to UMass to the proxy. It forwards it over to a registrar. It comes back and says, you need to go over here. That email address for Keith at Eurocom is located at this other SIP registrar. It looks very much like a DNS server model. And it then goes down to Keith and says, okay, do you want to take this phone call? He says yes. So these SIP messages go back saying, yes, you may establish a phone call now. And presuming that they're not both behind firewalls and have private addresses, they can now talk to each other directly. But that's a challenge. So the structure looks very much like DNS, right? You have this hierarchy of servers. You look up to see where this other one is, and you try to get it registered. There's a different standard out there to do this stuff called H323. It's an alternative, full-featured application that has been around a little longer. SIP comes from the IETF. H323 comes from the ITU. So this would be the difference between the 5-layer TCP/IP model and the 8-layer or 7-layer ISO model. It's just different standard. Most systems support both, but video conferencing systems tend to support this, in my experience. Most of them support H323. And SIP is simpler. It's a little bit boiled down. So believe it or not, we plowed through that entire pair of sections that we were supposed to exactly on time with like a minute over, Like it's a miracle. It's like the fishes in the loaves or something. We did it just in time. He kept turning slides, and there were still enough people. All right, guys, thank you. I will crank out. How's the homework going? Has anybody looked at it? And doable, short, killer, different stuff, fun, interesting. Okay, you know how to draw the traces? You got an eye? Okay, awesome, great. Love to hear it. See you guys. Have a great one. Bye, everyone.